UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Cross Fire.
Good evening, everyone. And I always love that violin. You know, I saw Chris's head kind of go into it.
Yeah, I like it. It's pretty cool.
The Padre would be too, but he's still fighting for every breath. And with Decker, I just don't see him as a fiddle kind of guy. I just don't see that happening.
Well, I'll have you know.
Oh no!
And this is no bullshit.
Yeah,
the first instrument I ever picked up in grade school was a violin.
Okay, so could my other three co-hosts put their thumb and finger like this and do this motion for me? It's the three world's tiniest violins playing for you right now, Decker.
I want to know how long that violin lasted before you broke it in two.
1 year.
So welcome, folks, to UAP Cross Fire, the intimate conversation of four men that's going to have a fifth one join us here in a second. And we sometimes get to your questions and your inputs. It's been a while since we've all been together on the show, and it's wonderful to see everybody. Everyone knows Chris DePerno up in the great state of upstate New York. Dan the Padre Carlson in South Dakota, kind of our spiritual as well as our referee many times. We have Decker, our man on the West Coast, who is always providing the West Coast best viewpoint, and myself up in the great state of Maine in the Northern Territories of New England. We have a great guest tonight, a longtime friend, one of the best researchers, one of the most interesting guys that I know on the beat. We've yet to meet in person, but we have talked numerous times over the years, interviewed on my old show, and really happy that we could get together to bring him on. I don't think we have a lot of housekeeping for tonight. I do like to thank everyone that does support KGRA. Your continued support on the station is important. Yes, I'm getting steps closer to getting my own show back on the air. Chris, of course, Spy Detective and Dark Matters Radio with Don Ecker. I'm kind of leaning on the Padre. It's time for him to create his own single show as well. But he's enjoying too much the guest appearances. He has become the toast of many other of the shows on board. With that said, wait a minute. Skywatcher's here. He's giving the time out. Yes, sir.
I am really a bad person holding a secret, but I got to say I'm excited for Commander's.
No, please.
I mean, I do have a rough draft of what people can expect. So I'm going to flash it on the screen. This is actually...
You don't have to have your children, if their children are watching the feed, leave the room. It's nothing like that. It's pretty
Here
dull.
is it's still a work in progress, but this gives you a little idea, a little taste of what's coming.
This will be the non-fungible token.
There you go, 9-line.
Wow.
So
I like that.
Hopefully all of you are going to be part of this, including
I don't understand.
He had to explain it to me. You can Google it or DuckDuckGo it, what 9-line is, the communication that goes on. You don't know?
He's just trying. This is a cry for attention on Decker's part.
The Silverback is busting my chops.
Yes. I'm doing a Gavin Newsom here.
Oh my gosh! All right, guys, have a great show. I just wanted to do that, and happy belated St. Patrick's Day, everybody, too.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, sir. So our super producer in the back. Let's bring in Steve Douglas. Steve Douglas, you'll see his website flashing up through the. He's at deepbluehorizon.blogspot.com. And Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you'll hear a little noise in the back of Steve's. From time to time, you hear him pop off. He's not. Hopefully, he's not angry. He's not swearing at us. But I'm pretty sure with our warm up, the short time we had together, I think he feels pretty comfortable with the gang that we have here. Steve, for those that are new to this show and new to you, you and I met because of my obsession with the Triangle aircraft. You had put out some very interesting analysis. You had tracked down some pictures. And then I found out all about the really cool stuff that you do. So I'm going to have a couple leading questions to get you introduced to the gang here at UAP Cross Fire.
Gotcha.
And the greatest audience on the planet that listens to us on KGRA DB. You pioneered, and in the day and age that you started and how it still is such a relevant way, you put out the handbook, the instructions on how to listen to radio broadcasts on military frequencies and track activities that were going on around you. Is that a fair way to sum that up?
Yeah, I guess so. I started way back in the last century, just listening to police bands, and I wanted to know what was going on beyond the FM dial. What were they hiding out there? I was pretty sure it was going to be on some other frequency that no people or nobody actually listens to other than the people who were talking. And of course, I did a lot of work, a lot of. There wasn't much out there on it. There wasn't a lot of stuff out there. I kind of had to do all the investigation myself to see where the military and where everybody else was using for communications, and it blew up.
Now, when you say it blew up, give everyone kind of one of your what I consider pretty sexy examples of how it blew up.
Well, I would say I'll start with the first example. In 1980, I think it was 86, I was listening to Navy communications on my shortwave radio, and I heard a midshipman talking on a sea to land link to the Pentagon, and he was talking about a Russian sub that was on fire on the surface, and that the radiation counters were going up, and they had people on the deck, and they wanted to know what to do. It was a Russian sub that had a missile compartment catch fire pretty close to the to Bermuda, and I had it all on tape. So I called a network news station and told them what I had listened, and of course they thought I was a nut. I mean, how come some guy in Texas hear this sort of thing? And I explained it to them and played the tapes for them. They went into the Pentagon and said, we hear that you got a Russian sub that's on fire off the coast somewhere. And they said, we don't know what you're talking about. We'll get back to you. Well, it turned out to be true. They came back, and I've been doing it ever since.
So one of my favorite observations that you made, this kind of was the catalyst that got you started. And then you delved into every area of this. And just recently on your blog spot, you had the word, and of course it's been on the internet in a number of places, catching air traffic control, talking with an Airbus, if I remember correctly, something that they were seeing as an aerial phenomenon.
Well, a long time ago, I don't know, I guess you probably all do remember the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
There's that famous scene in there where air traffic controllers are talking to an aircraft that has a near miss with a UFO. Way back then, that inspired me that if they're talking about it on a radio, I could intercept it. And that's what got me started in this whole business, basically. I don't know if I call it business, but I wanted to hear what they didn't want you to hear. And it turned out that it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be.
That's amazing.
So, yeah, this is a couple years ago, and it keeps happening. I've intercepted a lot of communications, particularly recently, with airliners or captains of airliners or pilots, whatever, reporting a lot of strange things in the skies, and it's increasing at a rapid rate. And it's not as uncommon as it used to be. It used to be they did a thing called lie to fly, which means if you saw something you didn't know what it was, you shut up. Otherwise, right, when you got on the ground, you were given a bunch of tests to find out if you were a kook or not. But now those restraints seem to have gone away, and a lot of pilots are talking freely on their radios about what they see.
Commander, can I ask him a question?
Absolutely, jump in.
Yeah, Steve, I'm really fascinated by your opening statement and what you said. But here's the thing that I want to know. How are you doing it so guys like me who like to copy you know how to do it? Because, I mean, I haven't a clue what kind of equipment to buy or how to go about picking stuff up, because that would be fantastic for ufologists to actually hear that type of stuff to collect data. I'm very, very excited to hear what you have to say to get an amateur person going with that.
Well, back in the 90s, I used to work for a magazine, or would you call it a newspaper, called Monitoring Time, where people like me got together and traded information. And out of that, gathering information from people like me, I put together a book called The Comprehensive Guide to Military Monitoring. It's out of print, but you can still find it somewhere. And when you find it, it will tell you all you need to know to get started in this in very non-technical terms. Plus, a lot of the frequencies that are published in there are still relevant today.
So, Steve, I'm going to throw a quick question that came up years back when you and I were talking on the other show. Aren't you breaking some kind of classified way of doing business? I say that with a little bit of a smirk on my face because I know the answer and I know where this goes. But I want to assure people that that you've got that thought out.
Yeah, the only line you don't cross is trying to decrypt encrypted communications, and that's, of course, something that's well beyond me. Everything else that's said in the clear, said on airways owned by the taxpayer, is fair game, as long as you don't use it for self-gain. In other words, if I heard something that would get me out of a speeding ticket or tell the neighbors that the SWAT team was outside, right, I'm not allowed to do that. But otherwise, if it's said in the clear, I'm free to receive it.
Wow.
I'd like to ask you about a UAP incident that you recorded on February 21st, 2021. It was a conversation between an Airbus airliner over New Mexico and I think ground controllers, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was flight 2292. He was talking to Albuquerque Center, and he had something fly right over him. I mean, it was close, and they basically complained about it to ground controllers. And I just happened to be sitting in my radio console. Normally, I record everything. I put it on an SD card and listen to it when I go to work, but I happened to hear that live, and I was stunned. I mean, they were very vocal about it. Luckily, I had everything going when I had it going and recording, and I would look at FlightAware, and I was able to find out where he was and when he said that and figure out which flight it was and track him to his destination. I have filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the FBI in Albuquerque many times to get more info, because supposedly it was turned over to them. The airline said that all materials, like the flight recorder and everything, was turned over to the FBI. But so far, I've hit that stone wall of silence again.
Why would that be? Why would the FBI take over that investigation unless that was a perceived national security threat?
Yeah, my thoughts exactly. If it threatened the airliner, that is something that's very serious. I mean, we can't go flying people around in skies where things fly over your aircraft that you don't know are up there that could possibly cause a problem. So I think that's why the FBI took over. Normally, you think the FAA would do that, but this was given to given right to the FBI.
So, Steve, you have a long history doing this, and I'm going to jump up with probably the first kind of baiting question, right in your wheelhouse. I'm sure that you tracked the recent events that went on in New Jersey, New York, that spread with the aerial phenomena, the UAP, the drones, quote unquote, that were flying there, the lead up to that, which seemed to be somewhat sinister, not getting a clear answer, and then change in administrations, and the answer comes out that it was under FAA control, and we had a lot of other people join in with us. I'd just love to get you to take a quick cut at all the parts and pieces of that.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the total reversal on that, where it was like, we don't know what these are, and then don't worry, we know what they are. It was a real quick spin around, which tells me that something behind the scenes is going on that we're not privy to.
Any theory?
I think it's DARPA related. DARPA, of course, I know. I'm sure all of you guys know who a DARPA is.
Sure.
Defense Advanced Research Project
Agency. Yep.
Agency. There we go. And they're supposed to be thinking 50 years ahead of what we are right now, and I would not doubt that they had some kind of a test going on right now that has to be done over a very populated area. However, there is another thing that I have noticed, and I even noticed it in my own city. There's a lot of federal funding going into police projects. One here in Amarillo, where I live, where they're setting up these regional crime centers. I live in a city that has 200,000 people. Every fire department has on top of it now what they call a drone in a box or a jack in the box. And when the police get a dispatch, say there's a shooting, a fire, something in the neighborhood, they automatically dispatch a drone to the area. They have like 30 drones covering my city, and it's not uncommon to see those. A lot of this stuff comes with federal funding, and I would not doubt that it's spreading throughout America.
If I could, I'd like to chime in on that. There are more and more police departments are using drones. They're using them instead of helicopters. They're more cost effective. You can put all kinds of equipment on a drone. You could use them for building searches. You could use them for crowd control. You can use them to, they're even talking about putting a direct energy weapon on it. The police have a direct energy weapon that shoots microwaves that can disperse a crowd. They say there's no permanent damage, but it goes, a fraction of an inch under the skin and pretty much heats up your skin where you disperse.
Yep. Sure.
And they're talking about trying to, see if they can compartmentalize that, put it on a drone that they can use it for crowd control or anti-terrorist type of stuff of that nature. So drones are the future of police work. They can track a suspect. They would use them in high-speed chases rather than a car. It's easier to track with a drone than it is with a car because it's less dangerous. You don't have to worry about, passengers or other people getting hurt with that. So drones are becoming more and more police-related. And I think Don will agree with me, being former law enforcement himself.
Yeah, and Steve, I also had a question for you. Back in the early 90s, I believe now it was 1992, where I live, which is in the San Fernando Valley of California, not too far from, I can't think of the name of the area now, but we had a situation that happened that became international. The Rodney King takedown, arrest, which ended up resulting in riots in the city of LA and what have you. Now, when that went down, I traveled over to Radio Shack and purchased the best tabletop scanner they had available at the time. And I think it was a Pro, if I remember, I think it was a Pro 2034 or something like that. Now, would that equipment, which it has a wide range of frequencies it can pick up, would that equipment be compatible with what you were doing with military freaks?
I still use a Pro 2035, if that's the scanner you're talking about. And it is excellent for picking up the military UHF bands. I'm listening. I have one going, chugging away. In fact, I've had one in my little radio room here, chugging away since 1993, I believe, and it is rock steady. It hasn't shown any signs of failing yet, and it's a very sensitive receiver as well.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
Now you just have to find it, Decker.
No, I know it's right above my head, as a matter of fact.
Well, there you go.
Uh-oh.
Right up
Oh,
there. Well, it's
Camera's
behind
moving.
that thing there. It's behind that thing,
got it.
whatever that thing is.
Whatever that thing is, the thing that we're talking about is right behind it. That's
I see a hammer. Is that a hammer right next to it? So if you get mad,
Break glass in case of emergency.
Yeah, it could be. Now look, I didn't want to tell you guys this, but
confession's early. Usually we have to be about a half hour into the show for the confession.
I gotta
well,
get my
yeah,
power.
you guys all know I have a replica 6-pounder artillery piece, Civil War vintage, right?
Right.
Well, I've got that now loaded next to my Tesla in the driveway, just in case. Now, I probably shouldn't make that admission on the air, but hey, these are uncertain times today.
Sure. And as I said during the fires, and thank God you and Vicki were not horribly impacted,
right?
That I really pitied any looter that showed up at your place, and I pity anybody that comes to key your Tesla. So, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay. That's good.
Because KGRA DB legal is limited what I should say on those subjects. So
exactly.
Leave it right there.
Hey, Steve, I would like to ask you in terms of the activity that you have been listening to, and I know that you've heard a lot of things over the years. Could you please share with us 2 things to the best of your recollection? What is the strangest conversation that you've heard? And what is the most amusing?
Omitting what we're talking about here tonight. That would be too self-flagging. So we nothing that we talk about tonight.
Right.
Gosh, let me think. I remember once there was a local senator who was, and this is back in the day when you could listen to cell phones. You can't do that anymore. And he was trying to get a woman into bed, and she was young, he was married, and he kept promising that he was going to take her to the Bahamas and to the Bermuda, and he was going on this congressional trip to South America, doing everything he could to get her into bed.
I hope you recorded that, Steve.
Actually, I didn't. However, somebody else did. And that person, who I didn't even know, was listening to the same channel. He gave it to every TV station and newspaper in town. They ran it.
Oh, no.
The FBI got involved. And of course, because I was the guy who wrote about this sort of stuff and was the expert on it, guess whose house they watched for 2 weeks?
Oh, no.
Yes. I was finally called into the Northern District of Texas DA's office, and they questioned me about this and asked how I did it. A little caveat, I got to go back a little bit. I was walking through a mall with my then very new bride, and I was going to go to Radio Shack and look at the new scanners. 2 guys walk up to me in suits and asked me if I'm Steve Douglas, and I said, yeah. And they flashed badges at me and said, yeah, we're from the FBI, and we want to talk to you about, eavesdropping on cellular communications, and if you would tell us how it's done. And I took them over to Radio Shack and showed them. And hey, you just buy this radio right here. That's the one you want. But it is, it's frowned upon. It wasn't illegal, but it was frowned upon. So later on, when I'm in the attorney's office talking to the FBI's about it, I said, "Why are you guys asking me these questions? Because I already talked to your guys." And they said, "What guys?" I said, the two guys in the mall, and they had no knowledge of it. Turned out they were private investigators for for that top politician who wanted to know how it was done. And so anyway, they watched my house for a couple of weeks, and they were absolutely sure I did it until this man put his hand up and said, "I did it. I'm the one. Mea culpa." They slapped him with a very small fine, and it all went away. Later on, it turned out the head of the FBI number, I know him quite well. I've known him for a long time, laughed about that incident and said, "We knew it wasn't you all the time. We just wanted to know how you did it because we didn't know how to do it."
Oh.
I'm not sure what part of that's more frightening or more humorous as the part of the story.
What happened to Senator?
Both.
That you have an intel agency or an intel, arm within a law enforcement agency that is not aware of how to grab open communications. That's on there. That's amazing.
I don't think you're going to ever
my
get a
friend
Christmas
is
card
the
from that.
FBI. I could tell you some stories about the FBI. Back when I was working a narcotics task force in the early 80s, and they took over something had happened within DEA. But the FBI ended up coming in, heading that agency for a while. And one of Mr. Hoover's dressed down, buttoned up boys, if you know what I mean. And that was not how you go in to undercover narcotics.
Steve,
I think you were trying to pass some kind of irony or maybe some subliminal message in the way you described that, Decker. I'm gonna have to listen to the playback on the show to see if I'm tracking on that. Dress down and button up, or button down, dress up. I'm not.
Yeah,
whatever.
This sounds like a 1920 type of thing.
Yeah.
That's
This was circa 81. Okay. Now Hoover, granted, was dead, but his legacy lived on. Okay.
Understand.
Hey, I got to finish this story.
Yes, please.
So later on, when this guy ran up for re-election, he lost, and
he didn't bring you on as his campaign manager.
The local media wanted to know where he was because they want to interview him about it, and they called me and said, "You wouldn't by any chance know where he is, would you?" And I said, "Give me a few minutes." So I was listening, doing my thing, found out that he had booked an airplane out of a local airport. He's going to make his getaway. He said that the press were after him. He wanted to, he was talking to the same girl, by the way. And she wanted to meet him at the airport. Well, I made sure the media was there to meet him as well.
Yeah, some people never learn their lesson, do they, Steve? I'd like to pivot a little bit, Steve. I want to ask you about something on your website because I'm very interested in this. You got an article about directed energy weapons, and we talked just briefly in the beginning of the show that the police are starting to use some stuff like that. But I also see that the military are now using it. What's your take on these directed energy weapons that are coming out?
Well, they're pretty scary. I mean, I wouldn't want to have a bag of Jiffy Pop in my pocket when they use one on me.
No.
But, a lot of the testing for the high-powered stuff, the stuff that they can knock a satellite down with, goes on just a state away in New Mexico. And in fact, I think if you look in there, you'll see a story I wrote about one when they did a test firing of one. And the result was what the Weather Bureau thought was an instant storm in the desert. And they couldn't figure out what was happening. And this, what was supposedly a storm, drifted out of New Mexico and over my town. And going through a painstakingly process of calling my experts, we were able to figure out that it was a directed energy weapons test out there in New Mexico.
So do we have directed energy weapons on satellites out there? Because I've heard some about we've had some kind of secret dogfights out in outer space with satellites.
Well, they work better in space, with in a vacuum. They definitely work better. I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised.
So, Steve, along that line, you have caught a lot of phenomena that seems to be based around experimentation. And I'm going to swing back to another earlier UAP/drone event that I did track some. You had some inputs on your website, and I think we actually spoke about it on a text. This is going back a few years, preceding the New Jersey events, the New Jersey, New York, Northeast Corridor, Mid-Atlantic area. There seemed to be a lot of activity that was going on out in the West. Basically, a little bit east of where you are in West Texas, northwest Texas, going up and across into just south of where the Padre is in Nebraska. And there was lots of reports. And now I'm hearing advertisements because I'm up early to drive to work, and I'm coming home late. So I catch a lot of stuff. And there's lots of podcasts now that are coming out about the experiences these people now are rapidly approaching a decade. In some cases, about 5 years in others. Any insights on that activity that seemed it was around military installations, it was around civilians, and I think it is very much in line with what you spoke about. Amarillo is a very interesting place to do this, the Jack in the Box experimentation, because the airspace, it's fairly wide. You have a good population center to work with. The airspace control is not as critical. You do not have like airliners that are trying to get into the airfield, though they tried really hard to convert the Air Force base that closed not too far from there. In fact, that was supposed to be a UAP / drone center of excellence test facility. I was with a company that was very interested in buying and leasing activities out there. So, what's your observations on that?
We've been seeing them out here too. We've seen, of course, not just the Jack in the Box UAVs, I guess you call them UAVs. In fact, I'm a
UAPs. Yeah, the UAS system is the military designation.
Right. In fact, I'm a UAS pilot. I'm a certified, certifiable by the FAA pilot. And,
Part 107, right?
Exactly. And I can tell when a drone's a drone, but I've had friends, I've seen it myself, and a lot of people are photographing like waves of little lights coming across, like squadrons of lights, all in the middle of the night, 4 or 5, 6, 7 at a time, coming from north to south or east to west, very high flying, coming either from New Mexico over Texas and vice versa. And I'm hearing aircraft talking about them too. I mean, almost every night I hear them say, "Hey, Bob," they'll be on their chat channel. And everybody remembers this frequency. It's really good. It's very easy to remember. It's 123.450, 12345, where they talk about this stuff. It's a great channel to monitor.
Sure.
And they go, "Hey, Bob, over there in that Airbus over there, do you see what I'm seeing?" And they go, "Yeah, I see what is that?" And they'll start talking about it. And this is almost a nightly event out here in we call the Great Wide Open. Particularly in central New Mexico, there's a lot of activity, of course, around Holloman Air Force Base, Clovis Air Force Base, which is 90 minutes from here, Kirtland Air Force Base, which has a lot of test stuff going on, and also up in Colorado. I'm getting a lot of reports of it as well. It seems to me that either they've stepped it up testing, or they have a system that's operational, and it works great outside, out where we are, because it's wide open. You don't bump into anything except, the occasional tree that grows down in a crevice somewhere. We don't have them on top, but it's a growing thing, and it used to be where I would live to hear one event, one thing. I would get that nugget of one conversation, maybe in 3 or 4 years, but now it's more common than ever. I left them speechless.
Yeah, no. Well, it happens every now and then. It's not it's a good sign. Decker, do you have something look like you're ready to pop up there?
No, I wanted to get that frequency that Steve mentioned.
123.45, sometimes called fingertip. It is actually an official frequency that allows general aviation pilots all the way up to airline pilots, even military people, if you have a VHF radio, to talk on, and you do not have a clearing authority. It's not an air traffic control frequency. It does not show up as a frequency at a controlled or an uncontrolled field. So 123.45 or 450, Victor VHF band, and it's a common frequency. And as Steve says, in the military we have guard on a UHF frequency, which I'm sure Steve frequents quite a bit, 243.0. That's an emergency frequency that parallels 121.5, which is the civilian guard frequency, and that's really supposed to be for distress. But most military aircraft always monitor 243.0. It's sometimes an automatic feature to the radio, so that when you have a radio on, if you hear that call come across there, and you can do it for a variety of reasons. You have an emergency, you're seeking someone's help, you're trying to get the attention of somebody in a formation flight, all those kind of things. That frequency is available. And 123.45 gets a little bit CB-ish. It gets a little chatty from time to time. I've heard some of the funniest verbal fights break out amongst pilots because everybody feels they have the exclusive right to have their conversation. And so, it's like a party line at sometimes where you're at. So I've had that come up over the years. But it is a great source. And as I've told you guys in the past, and Steve knows from him and I talking in the past, often I will listen on those frequencies when I'm flying, especially if I'm doing some kind of exercise work, especially if we're playing some kind of role where you want us to, with the airplanes that I fly, where you want us to simulate another resource, where it's much less expensive to hire my outfits to simulate being a B-1 or an F-15 or an F-18. Obviously, I can't go at those speeds, but I can do all the radio. I can send down imagery from the aircraft. I can make radio calls. But I always listen in those areas, and I also like to check reports from MUFON and MUFON-like folks that are online to see if we were detected, if people picked us up. Obviously, my plane is flying much lower, making a lot more noise because it's got propellers as opposed to a jet, and then kind of work that to see how effective we were in our tactics, what we were trying to get, or what has activity level. Steve, quickly, before we get too far off the line, I didn't want to forget this. It's on my checklist. Have you had, or do you think you have intercepted or dealt with anything that's not U.S. military, not North American military, i.e., do you think you've bumped up against anybody who might be a foreign nation that's using your techniques, using your kind of methodology?
Well, not personally. I haven't run into a Chinese spy outside my door or anything like that, but
everybody else has.
Yeah,
well, after tonight, you're on the list, so welcome.
Eric Swalwell did.
Oh, dear. Yeah, he ran into one. Ran in his bedroom.
And they did catch one out by Area 51 not too long ago as well.
Yep.
But, they know people can listen. We know they can listen. You got to think that your errant Chinese spy balloon can listen in as they go over. In fact, I followed that quite closely. It was interesting to listen to the military pilots talk about it. And what I got on my mind, a very good frequency to listen on the military UHF band is, if you ever hear them saying, "I'm going to Magnum,"
yeah,
357.000 megahertz, 357. That's a very good chat channel for the military.
So isn't Winchester?
Yes, Winchester is 300.06, 30.6.
Wow.
Well, just so you know, this show is being monitored all the time. Just so you're aware.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Turnabout's fair play, I guess. I'm monitoring. Why shouldn't I be monitored, right?
Hey, Steve, what we've been getting reports, and we think that a lot of them are these new hypersonic missiles that been coming up. And I saw on your website here, you B-52s are now carrying these new AGM-183 hypersonic missils.
Yeah, spotted one over Amarillo just a couple of weeks ago. It was quite a surprise. Supposedly they were canceled, but apparently they're resuming carrying them again.
So, do we know how fast these things can go and stuff? Because a lot of people think they're, UAPs rather than hypersonic missiles. So they got to be going somewhere around at least Mach 5, right?
At least there's rumors that they can go Mach 10, but that hasn't been proven. They're not going to give out the speed numbers on these things yet. But yeah, I was surprised to see it as well. But it was interesting that it was on a B-52 painted day-glow orange flying over my town in broad daylight.
Yeah, I got the picture of it right here.
So that is not an old B-52. Of course, all B-52s are old, but that is a paint scheme that is reminiscent of 1960s testing, those orange panels. And I think Steve really brings up an interesting point. If you, Steve, did you track that as a B-52 coming out of Louisiana?
Yeah, it came out of Barksdale and went up to Dugway, and it flew back. Right back over the city again. It still had its missile attached, but he wasn't hiding from anybody. I mean, if he wanted to hide, I wouldn't have picked a clear blue day and flying over the sound flying over an area where one of the town filled with sky watchers. I mean, we got a lot of aviation photographers here, so he might as well been shooting fireworks up the back to get someone's attention. I'm pretty sure that's what you call a dog and pony show. Kind of flex to let China and Russia know that we're not sitting on our thumbs here. So
interesting on the dog and pony show. I was going to say for the other hour, maybe we'll carry it over. We can return to it. One of the pivotal pictures that you put out was 3 triangle aircraft that were flying in formation, and they were maneuvering. You researched a bunch of kind of bogus claims that had been made, what those aircraft were. And then it appeared that a couple B-2s, very unusual for them, were seen during the day flying formation. You got a couple seconds to spin that back up for everybody?
Yeah, sure. In fact, I photographed them again a couple of years later.
Right.
It was 2 B-2s and this third aircraft that wasn't a B-2. It didn't have that double serrated sawtooth edge. It looked a lot like a B-21, and the B-21 wasn't supposedly flying then yet. So either it was a prototype of the B-21 or it was something else. It was, I would say, the size of a B-2. It didn't look small or anything. The B-21 isn't quite as big as a B-2,
but two-thirds, about 66% the size.
But this one was in formation with them, and it was readily apparent that it was about the same size as the B-2s it was flying with. Then there was that flight of 3 triangles, and this is 15 years ago, that me and Dean Muscat and Ken Hansen photographed. We were kind of tipped off about it from a friend who was an air traffic controller, and first we thought they were B-2s as well until we zoomed in, and it was a totally different type of aircraft. It was like a pure triangle, almost like the old A-12, or I said the A-11, A-12.
A-12, correct.
Yeah, the A-12.
2, right.
And 3 of these flying in formation, and we had big, long telephoto lens, we still do. They were probably 20 miles south of town, but we got some fairly good photographs of them. And it was interesting because for once, I wasn't the only one seeing and photographing these things. It was, you get that, how come it's always you, Steve? Why do you always do it? It was lucky to have backup that day. So
what conclusions years later have you drawn on those events? Because I thought, if I remember correctly, you and a few others, did the public inquiry. Then you pretty quickly, one of the statements that came out didn't add up. So you were able to disclose that. And going back into timing, the internet and the social media aspect of internet was really now starting to take off. People were able to quickly look things up, see this kind of information, and interact. What did you guys get any kind of a final conclusion? Maybe take us through a little bit.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was one of these social media type situations where you can have immediate feedback. And even before we went public with the photos, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't what normally flies through the skies. And we talked to the Air Force, we talked to Whiteman Air Force Base, we talked to Edwards. They said they had no B-2s flying that day. Coincidentally, after the photos were published, a month later, they flew 3 B-2s over Amarillo at low level, and then later on claimed that the aircraft that was seen by people over Amarillo, Texas were B-2s. They just neglected to say it was what date they were flying over Amarillo. So it was as Bill Sweetman, I think you guys know Bill Sweetman, wrote
Sure.
a great book on Aurora. He said it was a very expensive dog and pony show, which only led good credence to the fact that we saw something that we, that they still want to keep tight-lipped about. Ask yourself this: we have stealth fighters, we have stealth bombers. What is the only type of aircraft in the inventory that we don't have stealthy yet? And that would be transport, absolutely. And of course, because of you don't want your enemy to know, you could slip into the country and bring a couple of dozen Navy SEALs without them knowing it, doing a halo jump out of the back. You keep it quiet. Unfortunately, that day, they again flew it over my house.
Yeah.
So
They should find another place to test rather than going over your house. I
Well,
would think they'd be smart enough by now.
Let's explain that a little bit. So Steve lives and where he's positioned at. Obviously, he's a known entity. But there's reasons why flights are going to be going over his part of the world on a fairly frequent basis. Part of it, he explained. You have Dugway, you have ranges by Cannon Air Force Base, you have Holloman Air Force Base, you have large areas for ordnance, you have large areas for ground tracking to test, to do a lot of things. And you also have this ability to maybe show the sword and scabbard and not have to rattle it too much. You're able to do that. So there's partially reasons for that. It's also because the weather is very favorable in general. So when you have favorable weather, this is where this is going to happen.
There's another reason as well.
Jump in, please, Steve.
The Chinese and the Russians do not listen to official government press releases. They prefer to get their information covertly. And if I'm the Pentagon and I put out a press release about our new super secret weapon, they're like, it's like what we do. We put out propaganda. We try and scare people, rattle the sword a little bit. But they do pay attention to things that pop up that aren't supposed to pop up. And I do believe the intelligence agencies and organizations in this country know that China and Russia and any of our enemies pay more attention to chatter than they do official releases.
I would like to ask about your monitoring there. You're in Texas, and I know Texas is a huge state. I don't think people realize how big it is. For example,
you try to drive across it.
Yeah, I used to go do some wild boar hunting down by Laredo, and I would leave Rapid City, South Dakota, and I knew when I hit the North Panhandle, Texas border, I was halfway there. So, I mean, that's a huge state. But your proximity to Mexico is such. Do you ever pick up traffic that you attribute to cartels and any of their activities?
Absolutely. In fact, cartels are using one of the Navy's old fleet SATCOM satellites, and I listen to them daily. The Navy abandoned this I say abandoned. It's not dead. It's still on. It's turned on. I'm sure they listen too. But there's a satellite right over the equator that both Brazilian truckers and cartel members use as their own private CB radio. I was listening to some chatter just before we went on air. It's what they use now, and it's a gold mine of information. Now maybe I shouldn't have put that out, but it is. All you have to do has the proper equipment, and by that I mean a radio and a proper antenna. These satellite signals are very weak. You have to build or make an antenna or buy a surplus antenna that has something called right-handed circular polarization. Otherwise, you won't hear the stuff going on. And every day I hear chatter from cartels.
What are you hearing? What are they saying?
Yeah, just get the guy killed, Dan. I mean, you're not going to vacation in Colombia anytime soon, Steve, are you?
It's not coming out of Colombia. It's coming out of Mexico.
Oh,
It definitely. Colombia is kind of a non-player now. It's all Mexican cartels right now.
Oh, tell me that our good guys know how to monitor that stuff too.
Well, it's their satellite, so I think they would. I mean, they could turn it off if they wanted to, but they don't.
So wait a minute. A taxpayer-funded United States satellite is a communications hub for the cartels in Mexico?
So
Well, after listening to Doge has turned up, Dan, are you surprised?
So we're public telephone booths, and I'm sure everybody had a proper written warrant for listening to telephone calls and over telephone booths back in the day. And I'm sure every cell phone tower is absolutely sacrosanct. No one would cross that line. Correct? Look at the faces here, folks. Everyone's frozen with those really uncomfortable smiles.
Yes.
Steve, I just a thoughtful this that you don't go visiting Mexico anytime soon. After that. But I'd like to ask you a question about one of the articles in your website. I thought was very good. Trump announces America seeks to the forefront of AI technology and Operation Stargate. I never heard of Operation Stargate. What's that all about, Steve?
Oh, I could tell you that, but
you'd have to kill me.
No,
you get a one-way trip to Mexico.
There you go. Yeah. By the way, I hate to tell you guys this, but I actually own part of a house in Mexico. My dad passed away in November, and he had a house in Mexico. Actually, he had 6 houses in Mexico, and he left me one. But needless to say, I probably can't go visit it right now.
No, I would say not. But anyways, what is Operation Stargate?
Well, it's shrouded in secrecy. We kind of touched on it a little bit on the article. Kind of refreshed my memory because I've slept since then. When did I post that?
January of 2025.
It wasn't that long ago. Oh my gosh. I think it's the directed energy weapons that are getting to me.
I guess apparently Operation Stargate is now going to be using a lot of artificial intelligence from what I've read here, that this is going to be the wave of the future, and we're going to be able to do things, go places and everything with artificial intelligence. And I've never heard of Operations Stargate before. I was curious when I saw that article. I go, I wonder what Steve knows about it.
Well, Stargate has come up as a term for a lot of different projects over the years, and I think you see it in the unclassed views, it is obviously to gather attention. We're coming up against our break here, Steve. Something to think about for the backside of this with Stargate. One of my favorite topics that I bring up almost every week is the crowd kind of sourcing of tracking people reacting to stuff. And as Decker said earlier, I'm sure that what you put out on the website and other parts and pieces are tracked. But I think also comment on watching who is looking at your stuff and other folks like you.
Yeah, my emails are nuts. You wouldn't believe what I get from people.
Well, you get me emailing you all the time, so I mean that right there has got to put it into kind of in the freaky zone.
Well, I get a lot of there I was. And it's always the guy not wearing a shirt, right?
Right.
There I was. I got to send you this fuzzy photo of something that flew over my house. Can you tell me what it is? I'm like, it could be navel lint. I can't tell from your photo. I also always ask them for context because context is really important. If you don't know where they were looking, what time it was, where it was taken, then the photo really means nothing.
Well, gang, we're coming up against the break. We're going to be jumping for our 3-4 minutes for commercials and activities. We're throwing some stuff into the chat room from Steve's website, the Deep Blue Horizon blogspot.com. Just put Steve Douglas UFO, Steve Douglas blogspot, and you'll be able to catch it in almost any search engine. And we'll pick this back up on the other side in about 3-4 minutes. Your KGRA Radio DB, UAP Cross Fire, Chris, the Padre, Decker, myself, Commander Cobra, and our special guest, Steve Douglas. Be right back.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Well, that was a really blistering fast hour, folks. Steve, I'm gonna answer an email that I read on the break. Must have been somebody that known us back in the day when we were together on Task Force Griffin, and he wanted you to speak again about the triangle-shaped aircraft that you saw. And I kind of remember this when we talked about it. You were it was either an exercise, you were at an airfield. The weather was not great, and you saw this aircraft fly over during an exercise or some activity going on. Did I give you enough on that?
Yeah, I think he's probably talking about Roving Sands. That was used to be an annual war game out in
Right.
New Mexico near Roswell. Like nothing ever flies around Roswell, right?
Right.
And it was me and my father-in-law. I was down there to actually working. I was working for Aviation Week, doing some photography and reporting on the exercises. And one evening, while we were waiting for some storms to clear, and they did, they had their exercise for the night. The F-18s and F-14s, missed the F-14, came in. They were bedding down for the night, and we were just sitting there talking, and we saw this aircraft with no lights on coming straight for us, completely quiet. And I picked up my video camera, and keep in mind, this is around 11 o'clock at night. I went to shoot video of it, and I had been shooting all day, and my camera failed, but I got 7 seconds of this craft flying, and it flew right over us. We saw it a lot longer than what I had video of it. It was eerily quiet. There was no noise whatsoever. It flew directly over us, did a little, I call it like a pirouette, almost a turn on a wingtip, flew over the Roswell base, which was being used for the Red Forces that day, and went back into the murk and across the mountains towards Holloman Air Force Base. I had never seen anything like that, so stealthy, so quiet, and we both just stood there with our jaws down, basically on our laps, watching whatever this was. And we never heard anything on the radios about it. We never heard any chatter from the base. I don't think at Roswell, the Red Forces even knew it was there. It was obviously taking part in the games, otherwise you wouldn't come near the base.
Sure.
And but to this day, we don't know what it was.
I remember when we talked about this, and obviously one of our guests, or I should say one of our audience members from the past did as well and brought that up. Have you published those pictures?
Yeah, they're probably on my website somewhere. I also I did a piece for Unsolved Mysteries on it. Remember that show?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I sure do. And in fact, I remember there's a classic Intercept Unsolved Mysteries piece there. It's called Interceptors. I can put it in, I think Fandom is where I read it last. Let me see if I can pull that up, and I'll put it into the chat room. But yeah, talk about the Unsolved Mysteries piece.
Yeah, that was fun to do too. I didn't get to meet Robert Stack, which I really wanted to do. But they came out. They actually computer enhanced my video, what little I had of it, and we basically reenacted it. They were interested in it because of of course, the history of Roswell, and to be truthful, it was something that was unreal, or not unreal, but unusual, and flying in the skies near, of course, where one of the most famous UFO crashes or retrievals happened back in 1947. So people drew the connection there. It was a really fun shoot. We had a great time with this Australian film crew who seemed to be fascinated by us, and they like to drink a lot of beer, which we like to do as well. And
good.
we
It's a good combination for seeing black-winged aircraft in the late hours.
Oh, yeah, and we got paid rather well for it. And but it kind of opened the door, a peek behind the curtain. It's like people say, how come we don't see you out at Area 51, Steve? I'm like, why go there when they seem to come to me? Area 51 is where black projects are born, but New Mexico is where they're tested and proven. And that's why you see more in New Mexico than you ever will out in Nevada.
I would agree with that assessment, especially when you look at the level of activity that goes on. I think Tonopah is one of those very, very interesting places, but it's on the edge of the famous red flag areas of the base activity, and I think Fallon has a lot of interesting things that happen. But those are intensive training areas, which I think provide a lot of cover for things that are going on. But I think when you're looking at activity, especially when you see things like former Soviet or Russian aircraft that are flying, and you see them during the day, we've over the years, there was once highly classified, no longer dissimilar air combat training between U.S. Military forces and U.S. pilots flying then Russian design and aircraft to learn how to defeat them, to learn their vulnerabilities, and learn, more importantly, probably their strong points, so that you didn't fall victim to it.
Yeah, the Red Hats.
Right, the Red Hats, and of course, the Red Hats, Red Hawks. They're celebrated now. The stuff that's come out. I remember when I was stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base, when General Bond was killed, and very quickly General Bond was. The rumor that went around is that he was flying the then stealth fighter, the 117 Nighthawk, that was not named at that point, and it was obvious to a number of folks that this is what he was in, and they very quickly came out and said that he was killed in a MiG aircraft that had malfunctioned. You can imagine how difficult. Some of the Russian aircraft, spectacular design, can be a little bit finicky in maintaining them and making them work.
Commander, that brings something to mind. Back in the early 90s, when my wife and I were publishing UFO magazine, I had taken, for different reasons, a number of trips out to Area 51. And as a matter of fact, when the then governor changed the name of Highway 375 to the Extraterrestrial Highway, both Vicki and I were featured speakers at that event. That was right at the time that the massive Independence Day film had come out. They had a lot of the actors and what have you out there. But the reason I mention this is that after Bob Lazar, of course, everybody knows who Lazar is, knows what his purported dealings were at Area 51, talked about recovered extraterrestrial craft, which would have been, if that's true, and I kind of am leaning toward he was telling it as he knew it. But if that was true, that was one of the most astounding top secret events ever. But at one point, Lazar was asked by an interviewer if he could mention anything about former Soviet MiG aircraft out at the site. And he clammed up. He wouldn't talk about it.
Right.
That was, to me, high strangeness. I mean, here's a guy who's talking about purported flying saucers, but did the government have MiG jets out there? And he wouldn't discuss it. Now, does that strike you as odd?
Well, before Steve jumps in, I'm going to say no, because the fear of God about that program and what was going on with that program was unbelievable. There's a lot of reasons for that. There was a lot of sensitivities to where those aircraft had come from, how we were able to get those aircraft. Usually it was countries that were either fighting proxy or surrogates of the then Soviet Union that had recovered them. So that activity was very, very closely held. The other part was this. It gave us a huge advantage if we had gotten into any kind of shooting activity. And I can't say with any authority beyond what I suspect that much like the world's reconnaissance efforts, and I want to go back to the Chinese balloon with Stephen in a couple minutes. we probe all around the edges of the then Soviet Union. Now we do the same thing with China. We've had some very famous and very, very tragic events that have been around, like the RC-135s when they were penetrating up in Korea and places, and with the then Soviet Union, lost KLL-007 because of it. That was a very closely guarded secret for a lot of reasons, and there was no good reason to give that up, to give that information up, that we were actively doing that. And I will go one step further. I've never been able to get this more officially. A good friend of mine that wrote a number of books, he even stuck me in as one of his characters in one of his books, wrote about something that I could never get him to tell me if he had just dreamed it up. He was a Marine fighter pilot before he became an author. And he talked about actively flying Russian, then Soviet airplanes in places like Vietnam by U.S. pilots that would join formations and get into, of course, obviously take advantage of the fact that they were flying in the colors of the enemy. And there are some historic precedents. It goes all the way back to World War I. The Germans lost one of their airplanes to the French, and the French actually flew this over the lines. And when they were flying over Allied lines, they had the ability to actually drag a rondelle out so that it showed that it was a friendly airplane. And then when they would retract this, when they got over the German lines and they were going out to get intel and to figure out where the troops were and the movements, and of course, it looked like a friendly airplane. So there are some historical precedents that do that in the past. But Steve, I went a little bit off subject there. Does it surprise you that someone like Mr. Lazar would clam up when it came to this?
Yeah, no. I think that, and this is just a theory of mine now, but I'll kind of talk about this. I'm going to touch about this later on. I think Bob Lazar believed everything. In fact, I believe he thought he saw what he saw. However, I also think he's what they call in intelligence terms a useful idiot. Now, this means he's dumb. It means he was useful and they knew he was going to talk. They wanted him to talk. How do you scare an enemy? How do you fight a Cold War against an enemy? You make them think you have technology that they don't, and they have no hope of ever catching up to. We spent the Soviet Union in bankruptcy with them trying to counter the F-117 and stealth technology, and they couldn't do it. Think if your opponent is armed with extraterrestrial technology. Now, what do? You find somebody, you hire him, you know he's going to leak it, and you give him a show which looks totally believable, and it becomes a big giant story, then you discredit him. We talked about this earlier. The Russians and the Chinese don't believe things that come from official channels. But they do listen to chatter, and the Bob Lazar story is one of the biggest chatters of all.
Wow. Steve, I just want to mention on something like that one of the things that always intrigued me about Bob Lazar, and you say he's a useful idiot, and there's some truth to that, but he actually brought people out near the range in a safe location to actually watch vehicles. Now, with that being said, I want to ask you, because actually Commander made me start believing that some of this technology, this anti-gravity technology, may be ours. We started this discussion about Tic Tacs when the Nimitz was having the encounters and stuff. And, at first I thought, well, there's no way we have this technology. Then after, digesting some of the stuff that people had said, Commander had said, I tend to believe that there's a possibility that we've either reverse engineered this stuff already, because there's these great stories and pictures out there that are very credible about the Black Manta, the TR-3B. And what's your take on?
Well, Steve, isn't it great that I run with this crowd, because it's like they're clairvoyant. They know that I'm going to go TR-3 and Manta, because that's where Steve and I met.
Well, when he was talking about Lazar and using that, I'm saying to myself, well, this is a perfect topic, because if we have this technology, you would use useful idiots to make the enemy think that we reverse engineer UFO stuff.
I talked to Ben Rich before he died, and he was promoting his book Skunkworks.
Great book.
And, yeah, great book. And Jim Goodall, I guess you all know Jim Goodall as well.
Yep.
We both had almost the exact same conversation with Ben, and Ben said, wherever you think we are now, we are 75 years ahead of that.
Well, didn't Ben Rich also say that we have the technology to take ET home, and that whatever you thought of, whatever you saw on TV as Star Wars and stuff, we've either accomplished it or we threw it away because we didn't think it was any good?
Yeah, that came from Jim Goodall. He was the one who told me that quote. When I talked to Ben, he didn't say that, but he said, wherever you think we are 75 years beyond that.
Yeah,
so go ahead.
I just said, I think Ben Rich actually spoke at the University of Berkeley, where there were people who I know that actually heard him say that. And then he strikingly says to this person, because he met with some few people afterwards, and they asked him, well, what do you mean by we can take ET home? What kind of propulsion? What could this? And he only said one word, which I've never been able to figure out, but he says, think of consciousness. And then he walked away. So have we probably gone to a different type of system where consciousness now plays in a propulsion system?
Well, before Stephen answers that, just let me interject this. How many times have any of us watched the ISS live feed when suddenly something inexplicable comes into the frame? They immediately cut the feed. Okay, this has happened many, many times.
So you don't think that when the astronaut's hand goes over the camera lens when they're outside the space station, that's an accident?
Hey, but my point is that might give a hell of a lot of credence to what Rich said about our technological prowess. Okay, because I believe personally that we have extraordinarily advanced spacecraft right now up there flying around. I believe that.
I agree. I agree with you. I have seen some things and photographed some things. I remember when I was once out, I had a friend who would give me a lot of tips. I won't even tell you his name, even though he's passed away. He gave me a lot of tips, and he said I should go out to White Sands Missile Range and just watch. So I went out there. This is maybe 20 years ago, and he did tell me what it was, but he said just go out there for a few days and listen and watch. So I went out there and I got a camping site at this little park that's adjacent to the White Sands Missile Range, and we saw 3 aircraft take off at about 3 a.m. and they sounded like jets. They flew by us. They went down and used the McGregor range, and then they came back. And they radioed the base and said, would you guys please turn off the lights? And they did. The whole base went dark. And we watched these 3 aircraft line up on a runway and come to a dead stop, hover for about a minute, and then one by one they landed on the runway. And as they taxied off the runway, they went over to the alert area where the F-16s usually are. The F-16s they use for NORAD to patrol the southern border. And a door opened up, and whatever they were, they went inside in the middle of the parking apron, not in the hangar. They went down and under the hangars, whatever they were. So yeah, I've seen it.
I'd like to ask you a question because I've just seen this on some chat. When Top Gun 2 came out, there was all of this. Is the Dark Star real or not? And so my 2-part question. Number one is,
great question.
One for you and one for Cobra. Is the Dark Star an indication of something that actually exists? And two, what is it about Mach 10 as it being a barrier? Is that just like the sound barrier, or some reason that can't be exceeded?
Well,
Steve.
Who are you talking to first?
You go first, Steve.
Well, we know the SR-72 is flying. What we don't know is if it's manned. As for Dark Star, yeah, I mean, that's interesting they would use that name, which is because that's what I report the call sign was for an experimental aircraft that left a pulse detonation wave engine trail across the country that used the call sign Dark Star. I don't know if that was a nod of the cap or they just, conveniently picked
I
that.
think somebody in Hollywood that was writing follows your site, Steve, and grabbed that call sign from there.
I used to know a guy out in Hollywood. He wrote James Bond stuff. I don't know if you remember his name was Bruce Firestein, not related to Harvey Firestein, the guy I talk like this.
Yeah.
Bruce Firestein, and he wrote a lot
Moonraker?
of James.
Didn't he write Moonraker?
I think he did. He also wrote one where I think it was called Tomorrow's Not Enough. One of those two.
Yeah. Today is not enough. Tomorrow. Yeah, I can't remember which one it is, but yep.
Anyway, I had published an article in Popular Science magazine about cloaking technology, invisible aircraft technology, and he wanted to use it for a James Bond gadget. So we got into good conversation about how this stuff worked, and it ended up being that James Bond has a car, invisible car. I think it was the Pierce Brosnan Bond.
Yep, sure.
That
was.
sort of thing.
I there with his phone, if I remember correctly.
So, and every once in a while I hear from him, and he'll ask me, "I'm working on this story, and what would be a cool way I could do this?" I would like some money for that, Bruce, if you're listening.
Well, this is the show where everyone comes to get their credits. So obviously, we are the ear to many of those folks. I don't know of anything magic about 10. I would say that anything past 6, you're starting to approach the same kind of problems. And what it really comes down to is materials. It's when you're still operating not as a rocket, but you're still using lift, and you're in air friction, which is you're creating lift on a wing. Now you're starting to get into skin friction areas. So Dark Star, I think Steve probably has a link to that. I will tell you that it was publicly said, if you tracked anything about the movie, they asked if they could use the actual place, a real place to do some of those scenes. Lockheed jumped at the opportunity to help them create the mock-up that was used. It attracted PRC attention when they had it out at that facility and when it was around, and then when they showed it at different showings. So I don't think anything was seen in the movie that reflects reality. But 2 points that Steve brings up. First, to answer your question, Padre, once you're past Mach 6, the X-15, and there are some absolutely fabulous books about that project, is some of the most amazing research that was ever done in terms of that aircraft, the risks, the measured risks that they took and managed for that program to be as successful as it was. The altitudes that they reached, the speeds that they reached, and the other things that they added to it. Today, we couldn't do it like we couldn't fly to the moon today. And I love to remind my younger folks that I work with that we got to the moon with 8-track players, cassette tapes were just starting to come out. Yeah. And that's how we got to the moon repeatedly, okay? Not without disregard to the amount of risk that was taken. But it was just a different time.
And our payback was Tang.
Yeah, there was. And I'm so glad you said that, because I'm sure we'll get some really good emails regarding your use of the word TANG. Not to mention the copyright infringement that's probably been used on that particular aspect with. So the speed that's portrayed in the movie is not such. I think anything past 6 which is really the threshold of hypersonics. And then there's one other aspect. It's the reentry and control of reentry into shutting down whatever is your engine that you're using to drive at that for sustained flight, especially. That's what really is the miracle of the SR-71. The SR-71 really refined and perfected an aircraft that operated at least Mach 3, probably higher than that. I don't think it was truly hypersonic. It was born out of a fighter project. But it repeatedly was able to provide with pretty good support network. Special tankers that had to meet it on it, places that it could land and operate. But incredible project that what it did. I think it was shut down way too early, but I'm kind of geekish on those subjects and think that those planes should be flying for a lot longer than they are. But getting back to Top Gun Maverick, that particular area, they let them use hangar space, ramp space to go do that, to give it a very authentic look. But they did allude to them that what was in there before had to be cleared out long before they ever showed up to do any of the access to go see that. Is that just a little lore, or were they actually telling that? Maybe a little bit of both going on.
There's interesting thing as well is if you're watching that scene and you see there's a camera that's tracking Tom Cruise and Dark Star, and it shows coordinates on the screen. If you go to those coordinates, it's Area 51.
Right. Yeah, I think that's to really differentiate, the capital G geek like myself, as well as someone who's just interested in that kind of stuff. But they did play a very interesting role there. With that,
now the Navy, they do most of their testing off of the coast of California near San Nicolas Island, and not out by China Lake or anywhere out there. So that's the place to watch if you're an aviation geek and you want to find the latest next generation Navy aircraft.
So, Steve, speaking about that, have you tracked when they set up these corridors that look like they're coming out of Nevada, out of New Mexico, even Texas, and then they go across California out to the range, and they actually set up a warning or a no-fly zone, and it's a corridor, and then it goes up. Have you tracked any of that?
Oh yeah, with great interest, and with my camera waiting and my scanners going with great interest, believe it or not.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a bit of it's public, what they do. Obviously, for airliner activity, there's a lot of desire. I think most of these aircraft are probably cruising above the altitude. But for some of these airplanes that we're talking about, some of these aircraft, I should say, use a better term that we're talking about, the 35 to 45,000 feet is a pretty useful band, and there are airliners and private business jets that live in those ranges, those realms of altitude, because of they're optimized for range and speed activity to get the most out of what they're using. Steve, TR3, Matt, give us an update, give us some thoughts.
Yeah, that's going back a ways, but I think it grew out of the A-12 Avenger program. I don't think it's ever... The only acknowledgement, or sort of acknowledgement, was the late, great Phil Patton, who went out to Dryden and went through their archives and found a folder marked TR3A, but there was nothing in it. If it did exist, or what I saw was a TR3A, I still don't know. Whatever it is, it's still highly classified. There may be reasons that we can't fathom that it's or things we can fathom or imagine why it's still classified that would blow our collective minds. But I would guess the TR3A either was a dead-end project or it evolved into what I saw in those formations or what I photographed several times over Texas. It may have been a prototype, it may have been like a mini B-2. Finding any mention of it Now, it has kind of morphed in what UFO people like to call TR-3B, which is a anti-gravity aircraft. But I've seen no documentation other than rumor on that.
Do you think that we've delved into anti-gravity with some level of success?
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. I was going to ask the commander there that he was used to be out there at Kirtland Air Force Base. Did he ever run across Phillips Labs over there on the base?
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's where they're working on all kinds of freaky stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Kirtland is one of the most interesting bases. It has an interesting footnote to the space race with the Mercury astronauts. The Lovelace Clinic is one of the sites where they tested candidates for the space program, just outside the fence of Kirtland Air Force Base, and that is not by accident. And they have done extensive nuclear research, especially in the munitions area.
Gentlemen, one of the greatest researchers, investigators of this field, going back to the very early years, was Donald Kehoe, a Marine Corps aviator, medically retired, became the director of the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, and was a genuine thorn in the government's secrecy over UFOs. Now, in one of his books, written in the 50s, I've got a copy of it here, he talked about the patriarch of German rocketry, Hermann Oberth. Okay. Of course, Oberth was an unrepentant Nazi, but he got scooped up and paperclipped, brought him over here to the States. The Pentagon ended up putting him under contract, which effectively silenced him. But in his very last public statement to the press, he made remarks stating that, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, utilizing anti-gravity, we are going to be able to get to the moon in a couple of days. We'll be able to do all of this anti-gravity research. Was ongoing, but he couldn't talk about it. Then he was silenced. Now, this was circa roughly 1958. Good God, if he was telling the truth, and no reason to believe he wasn't, what the hell have they done since 1958?
Well, anti-gravity is the holy grail. I mean, if you can lift something against gravity with not using an ounce of fuel or using any propulsion method, what do you have basically? Well, you have the way UFOs move.
Right.
Well, I don't want to go wacko, but today.
Don't start now, Don. Go wacko.
Come on, it's my turn.
Don't start now. Go wacko.
We have been brain busting over how ancient civilizations, i.e., Mesopotamia, i.e., the Egyptians, etc., and the people, incidentally, that built Baalbek, all right, how did they ever manage to move those mind-bustingly huge, heavy tonnage blocks of stone?
Have you seen the news lately about the Great Pyramids?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
What, any thoughts on that, Steve? I mean, if it proves to be true, any thoughts about cylinders and new things uncovered?
Yeah, if it proves to be true, if the pyramids were just the tip, so to speak, I would like to know how they did that, supposedly being a non-technological society.
Well, the mathematics,
the
mathematics alone of the Great Pyramid, how it aligns, its geometric precision, the mathematics that's represented there is staggering. It is just absolutely staggering. The amount of things that are portrayed in the angles, the shapes, the size, the comparison in lengths, the heights. It's phenomenal. And I happen to be a math undergrad guy, so it's one of those things that when you see it, you just absolutely. It's not by accident And then you start to ask yourself, what else is being told there?
Yeah, we would like to think that we were on the top of the technological period in this time, of our time. Why do we have to dismiss the fact that people that before here might have been smarter than us?
Well, there's always been other civilizations. They've always said that we're not the first civilization on this planet. We just don't know how advanced they were. I mean, what's the Earth been? 2.5 billion years old? We've had
4.5 billion.
Is it 4 point? Okay, that's even longer. So we could have had much advanced civilizations, here, and any number of reasons, meteor, or war or whatever, wiped them out. But there's always been some type of evidence that other civilizations had lived here. But I want to ask you this question because I'm really fascinated by your website, and I'm looking at that. I want to ask you, have you ever seen any of these crafts disappear? Because the new thing people are talking about is this cloaking ability that they have on these planes now, that they can project something from behind them and bring it to the front and almost like invisibility. And I'm wondering if you've seen any of that out where you were.
Yeah, in fact, I wrote about this for Popular Science Magazine, this cloaking technology.
Could you tell us about that cloaking? I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, in fact, I saw an aircraft do this, an F-15 at Holloman Air Force Base I was watching just basically disappear. And I started doing research into what they call active camouflage. And it's a reality. It's technically hard to do. It's very expensive, and it has a limited usefulness, but it is out there. In fact, they have adapted it now for troops on the ground to use.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I mean, do they have like suits that cloak them into invisibility? Is that what they do?
That special materials and stuff also that will drive a digital camera nuts, make it look invisible to the camera, the way the material works and reflects and patterns that make it almost impossible to pick up on camera. It's something to do with matching frame rates, that sort of thing. And they have like what they call new digital camouflage for tanks, and it's very classified, but if you do any research on it, you'll find it on the internet where there's been a lot of experiments done with that. With aircraft, it has a limited use. It does work for a little bit. So if I'm flying through an enemy's airspace and I have this kind of suit of what they call it, the chameleon, on, and it takes a picture of the bottom of the ground and projects it on the top of the aircraft, it works if you're far away. It makes it very hard to spot the aircraft. But when you get closer, it kind of breaks up. So I don't know if it's been abandoned. It was experimented with back in the late 90s and 2000s, but it is a real deal.
Now, can they muffle the noise on some of these aircrafts? I mean, can you imagine something that radar can't pick it up, it cloaks itself, and then if they can muffle the noise, you wouldn't know this thing was coming until it was on top of you.
Yeah, like that aircraft I saw down my roving sands. I never heard anything so quiet in my life, and I haven't since, flying at least.
Commander, have you seen this invisibility or you know about it?
Well, I'm much further down the food chain for stuff, and if I did, obviously, Chris, I wouldn't be able to say anything on air here. But I can tell you with all honesty, Bob Lazar kind of honesty. No, I have not. What I have seen is some very interesting use of things like thermal blankets, where when we would run an IR sensor over them, especially at a distance, it would block out and match a lot of the temperature for the same terrain area on that. And if you didn't have a talented sensor operator and you didn't change your angles, as Steve was talking about, or you got closer, then you started to see some of the anomalies that were going on there, and then you're able to figure it out. And if you look at some of the warfare that's gone on with with drones, quote unquote drones, UAP activity,
Right.
In places like Ukraine, places like Southeast Asia. You're seeing people that are persistently working, and they figure out a pattern. So one of the big problems that happens when you say, okay, I want to make it quiet, I've seen and been part of on the periphery and some actual up close ways to make helicopters quiet so that you could sneak in, especially in an area like where Steve is, you're isolated, somewhat built up urban area, that you could bring a helicopter in, insert and collect and leave kind of technology, trying to take advantage of vertical hold, vertical takeoff and landing kind of capability. And the problem is, of course, helicopters are extremely noisy. If it's not just the rotor blades, it's going to be the power source that goes on with that. So you muffle a lot of the power source. That's part of the reason why the Stealth Hawk, the H-60s that they used to grab bin Laden, had some of the difficulties it did. They were fairly high up. They were 5,000-6,000 feet above sea level. You got into that hover. You have to make a lot of compromises on power capabilities, because to be quiet, you have to make it less aerodynamically efficient, because when you're efficiently making lift, it's going to make a lot of noise. You're disrupting air molecules. So that's the issue with it. Plus you have engines. You look at things like B-21s, B-2s, F-35s, not as much, but really on the bombers, and I think what Steve ran into, to keep the noise and the heat signature down, you have these angled air intakes so that you can't easily see the front end of the engines.
Right.
The turbine, the blades are extremely dense, so they reflect a lot of energy. And then you dissipate the heat, but you also have to have that for thrust.
Yeah.
You don't need, thrust is just that physical action at right at the end of the burner can or right at the end of the engine where you're throwing material out of it. Once it leaves, you don't care what it does. So if you can make it mix with air very quickly and cool down, you're not going to have noise, and you're not going to have a heat signature. You're going to dissipate that. And that's good for, when missiles and stuff are shot at you. But all that comes at a penalty. So the F-117 is a perfect example, right? They took a Russian's mathematical formula. It was a guy who was a mathematician that was working at Skunk Works. They came up with it, and he created it many years before because you couldn't make it fly. We didn't have the computer technology because it's completely unstable. Without computers, if you hadn't built things like F-16s, which were legacy on things like F-4s that started to introduce augmentation of computers into the inputs, this thing does not fly. It doesn't glide. So you had to have that capability to put an input in and then move all these airfoil devices on it to make it operate. That's why when we talk about what we think that anti-gravity might be there, I think the reason there's two reasons in my mind. Steve, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. There's two reasons why anti-gravity is not prevalent, or it's been discussed. A, it is prohibitively expensive. It's very, very demanding. I also think it's very, very disabling. If the Tic Tac, as I postulate, is ours and it's manned, that means you're flying it in a way that's not being flown by anything that we would normally fly. You're not putting hands on controls the way you're doing it. I will use the word consciousness that Mr. Dan Rich was using, that word that he used it. And if you have that kind of power that you can generate anti-gravity force, that also means to me that you can make a very hospitable environment inside your aircraft, your vessel, that makes G-forces not felt the way we currently feel it when we bend air in airplanes and helicopters that I fly now. The other part is it's very destabilizing to the rest of the world if they don't have that. If you show that kind of technology in mass, does someone who has nukes or the ability to cause problems figure, I'm going to be too easily dominated, I need to now attack now? I think that those are two concurrent issues that come up with it. Prohibitive cost. Steve, any thoughts on those 2 points?
It could also be very disruptive. I mean, it could cause some. Oh, there's that noise again that keeps coming in.
Yeah, I think that's the government forces that they've zeroed in on you if you're on the show tonight, and you're taking the brunt of it.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. It sounds like a cicada in heat. I don't quite know what that is.
I'm not even sure I even want to know what that is.
So it's maybe it is disruptive. Maybe it's even dangerous to a point where it would affect not only the pilots but people who are in the wake or near this device that can create its own gravity or propel gravity. I mean, that could be a huge problem.
You look at some of the folks that have had encounters, close encounters, physical contact with during some of these recorded events. That would explain a lot of the physiological problems that they've had to deal with post encounter, the physical body damage that's been done to them. You bring up a really interesting point. In my younger days, I would have volunteered for any of this kind of stuff, regardless. Of course, you think you're indestructible, but regardless of whatever they would have told me, the thought to have been able to fly something like that or to pilot something like that, especially if you didn't have any kind of family obligations, I would have been all over it. And I am one of many that would jump at that opportunity. But you might be using people up. You may be finding that you can't get that. And that you brought up the stabilization. What would be the impact? What would be the negative impact to the whole world economy if you were to completely upend? We've heard for years, close to now 100 plus of energy sources, and if we had a more limitless energy source for wherever wherever we found that information out,
like 0 point energy,
right? How would that upset the whole world economy based on petro and other related fossil fuels, and how we regulate and how we run a world economy? To me, it would be rather devastating.
Mankind.
I've been working quite a bit lately with the artificial intelligence platforms, and I'm wondering how, as these things get more intelligent and we get into higher speed computers, if we're able to get quantum computing to a size that's manageable to put into an aircraft and couple that with AI, the flight capabilities and characteristics of the aircraft or whatever it was that we were able to produce, I think that that could happen still in our lifetimes, and it would certainly upend aviation. But I'm also wondering, what brought this to mind, Commander, is your mention that the F-117 was unstable in flight, and it had to have these constant computer adjustments. Well, you look at the state of computing when that was designed,
sure,
and compare
really
it to
crude in comparison.
Yeah, state of computing now. Oh, what if these two things come together? What is that going to do for aircraft? What kind of aircraft would be possible?
Well, Steve, I'll let you jump in a second, but I'm going to quickly say that there are certain limits if you're going to continue to use the production of pressure around an airfoil to create lift. There are efficiencies you can do, but there's going to be hard limits that you're going to go against. Look at where we are with the boom aircraft, the XB-1. Phenomenal aircraft. I think, when you hear President Trump say that maybe we leave the 747 behind, and this is what we need to make for the presidential Air Force One type airplane, the speeds that are involved in that. And it's going to be a quiet, the way it produces its sonic boom, it doesn't actually get to the ground in the same kind of problems. It's very interesting aerodynamics. It's optimized on that. But if that's the area that you're going in, you're going to hit limits. I think things like what Musk is doing with rockets, that you can point land that look like a 1950s Japanese science fiction movie where the thing flips around and lands on its tail and it's still usable without parachutes, without splashing, giant chopsticks, things that are catching boosters. I mean, we live in an age. If I was in the military, I'd want one of those. If I needed to get a group of people into a very specific spot, and I didn't want to worry about weather, and I didn't want to worry about, and time was of the essence. A orbital, suborbital shot like that you could put it down could completely change the complex of any kind of military engagement. If you could do that, or if you needed to supply people, again, this is, it completely upends that. And then you get into the areas that we like to talk about, the technology breakthrough, which I think we're nibbling up against. Steve, what do you think? Anything?
Yeah, especially with AI. AI would let us basically go beyond what our physical and mental limits are. I mean, imagine an AI fighter that could stop in midair, turn around, do anything it wanted to without having to worry about the flesh bag inside of it. I mean, we are our limiting factor on our aircraft. Bags of blood and air that need to be kept at a certain temperature and below a certain G factor so we can keep flying the airplane. Imagine if you can eliminate the component that keeps us from going further, which would be the limits of physical and mental limits that humans have. I think that's one of the reasons why Trump is investing so much in AI, because it does represent the future. It does represent an expanding horizon, something that hasn't happened since the Apollo days. We haven't had a huge project that basically changed the technology of the world since then. I mean, it's still, we just talked about this, it's still hard for people to figure out, how did we land on the moon when they're having so much trouble today?
So, well, Steve, I let me just say this very quickly, and I only say it half jokingly, but AI, quite frankly, scares me. And hey, I'll be the first to admit it. I'm very cynical. I've been cynical since I came back from Vietnam. All anybody has to do to see the possible challenges and the dangers of AI is to rewatch the original film, The Terminator, that came out in 1984. And like I said, I'm only half kidding about that. But what happens if AI, some flavor of AI, achieves true sentience? Then the bets are off.
Well,
okay.
Didn't Elon Musk say that there's an 18% chance that AI can actually take over the human race? I think
he's not the only one that's put that in there. I'm going to run this around. Padre, your thoughts on this, because we're coming up to the end of the show, and I want to close on this piece, because I want the last piece on it.
So the AI thing and what it would be capable of is addressed by a novelist called Jack Carr. He wrote The Terminal List, and his last novel in that series deals with a sentient AI entity and the ways that entity could absolutely manipulate the whole world and battlefields. And I think that it's something we have to tread very lightly in. I'm excited for the potential for avionics and aviation. Love to see some of the stuff we've discussed, but I share some of Don's concerns about what happens if it goes awry.
Chris?
I think AI is the wave of the future. Did you call me Commander?
Yeah, I sure did.
I think AI is the way of the future. I agree with Padre that it's got to be watched and monitored and stuff. But think of all the medical stuff that they can do with it. Think of all the stuff that they could cure with AI. And
think of all the great things we've done with computers, where 60% of our online activity is porn. I'm sure that we're really coded well for that we're going to go that way with AI. I'm sorry,
Well,
Chris. The reason I'm jumping in, we're running out of time. I want to give Steve the last shot on this. So here's
Go
what
for
I
it.
think. Number one, AI is a problem because it's man created. That's the number one issue. So it's going to be flawed. And I don't mean to get into the whole biblical part. I usually leave that to Padre, our licensed and properly set up religious representative. That's one. Number two, if everybody's doing it, you need to be figuring out what they're not doing. And that's why I think the anti-gravity part, because if that flesh bag can be encapsulated in an aircraft that can move around, that doesn't need AI to do what it needs to do, it will defeat AI aircraft that are running around autonomously or with some kind of a ground control. We're almost out of time, Steve. Give me about a minute's worth before I close up the show.
Yeah, I think AI is coming whether we want to or not. It just depends on what we let it know. We have to be very careful what we let it know. We think with our flawed human brains and all of the travesties and things we've done, and we're afraid that AI is going to copy us. Maybe we could make it smarter by not letting it know a few things about humans.
Interesting aspect. I just can't see how we pull that off because this is a creation of man, and we're flawed creatures, and I just don't see us pulling that particular piece off. Well, folks, went too fast, Steve. We need to have you on again in the not too distant future to pick this up because we didn't scratch the surface of a bunch of fun things that I would like to have got. Greatest audience on the planet. Thanks for tuning in tonight. It's great to see everybody. We have a lot of good shows coming up, much like we had with Steve tonight. Please visit Steve's site. He's got a couple great books that he highlights on there that I can't say enough about. And as I always try to end the show, God's peace that surpasses all knowledge and understanding. And after a show like this, I think it has a lot of important telling. Just look at the way the good Padre's done. Decker, you look great tonight. Padre, thank you again. Hope you're healing up. Chris and Steve, the next time we see you, hopefully we got the camera so we can get that great muggy as live, but you look great in that picture. Till next time, UAP Crossfire, KGRA DB Radio. We look forward to seeing you again.